make me upset too. You see what I'm saying? So I'm going to get pretty upset about it. Somebody says something about my mom. I don't care what the conversation is about. But if we go down that road, then we got a problem. I'm just trying to bring your attention to this idea of a tragic gap that can exist between how people interpret certain scenarios. I give you one that's a little bit closer to home. There has been conversation, discussion in West Virginia about racial profiling by police of people of African descent. So the West Virginia legislature commissioned a study that law enforcement stopping people on the highways were to document their race and the reason that they stopped them. Now, 301,467 stops later, they compiled this big report. And so what does the report say? The report says if you're driving on the highways in West Virginia, and if you're African American or Hispanic, you're 2.5 times more to be stopped. This is what the report says. And once you're stopped, you're much more likely to be searched. But after you're stopped and you're searched, then Caucasians tend to have drugs and contraband at a much higher rate, but they're stopped at a lower rate. And this is not me talking. This is Dr. Stephen Haas, the preeminent researcher who happens to be a friend of mine, the Western Division of Criminal Justice Services, who analyzed these 301,400 and some odd stops. But here's what my friend Haas had to say with a scientific nuance. Haas says that, well, we can't conclude that racial profiling is taking place. He says, but we can conclude that blacks and Hispanics are stopped at a higher rate, but we can't conclude there's racial profiling. I respond to Haas by saying, you're exactly right, because the only people who know whether or not they're practicing racial profiling are the people doing the stopping, writing the tickets, and doing the searching. And they're not about to admit to it. So we end up in no man's land. Now, your state NAACP president, Mr. Kenny Hale, his response was less nuanced. Hale says that it's tragic that still today, that riding on the highways of West Virginia, minorities are more likely to be stopped. Now, Hale and not Haas are looking at the same data. Hale says it's not unrealistic to conclude that if the data says that this group, for no apparent reason, are stopped at a much higher rate, are being profiled, it's not unreasonable to conclude that. Well, Haas says you can't tell. I say, why do the study? It's a waste of a whole lot of money. If we do the study and the data come back and says this, but then we say we still can't come to any conclusion. Now, here's what I'm trying to get you to see. How you look at anything will always determine how you interpret it. It will always determine the lens, the filter that you use to interpret what you are looking at is going to influence your outcome. And the hardest thing it is to do if you're a human being is to be objective. Because we're all biased by past experiences, by past treatment, by history. We're all biased by that. That's why as believers, we got to try to find an unbiased standard by which to compare and interpret things, and when all possible, we use the lens of the Bible. And the lens of the Bible can help us to avoid our own preconceived biases from influencing the conclusions that we come to. And we want to come to a conclusion that is biblical and true and is accurate. Y'all follow me? Now, I got to do a commentary every now and then because when the media is preoccupied with something, I got to give a commentary on that to try to bring some biblical perspective. Now, the whole deal with Gates. Now, if I get stopped, and I have been stopped, as a matter of fact, I never said anything about it. Last year, I got stopped 2 times on the same day by the same sheriff. I was driving a different car. I had a friend of mine's truck coming in to Charleston, I got stopped. I had my own car going back, and I got stopped. I was never cited, but I was just stopped. And I was told that it didn't look like you had on your seatbelt. That's what I was told. On one day, my son and his good friend, they were stopped, and they pulled out automatic weapons, held them to their head. So they looked like somebody who had been identified in a shooting. Now, the suspect was 5'9", $155. My son is 6'1", 235, and that's on a good day. and his friend is much larger than that. And they got stopped. I happen to be in Huntington, and people called me on cell phones, and I'm on the cell phone. They're standing right there beside the police officer while they're talking all this nonsense. After the whole situation was over, the next day I called down to the Charleston PD and said, look, I ain't trying to cause no problems up in here. I'm just trying to make sure that my kids stay alive when they're walking. This wasn't driving, they were walking. And know what they told me? No, we're not going to apologize. That just happened and all in a day's work. Now, I never said anything about it. I talked to the chief of police about it. I said, this is why these young guys on the street doesn't have respect for your police officers. It's because the attitudes that they have even when they're wrong. And they're not even to admit that they're wrong. And this whole thing with Gates, I can't call the president when I get stopped. He's not going to make some comment about my situation when I get stopped. This is not about Gates, and that's the problem with the whole situation. Gates is making it about himself. Normally, Gates is treated like an iconic hero all over the world. He probably commands $50,000 every time he speaks. Seldom drives, he's chauffeured around like he's a star. But on the one day when he have a problem, he got the president to wade in to help him. Now, most people don't have that type of support. And so my commentary response to this is, okay, Gates, once this thing is over, are you going to lend your voice to the bigger issue? Why don't you lend it back into West Virginia, where you have a major problem that no one will really give attention to? So the media has been all up in arms over this. We've wasted more times talking about this. And then the president say, well, y'all, let's just all get together and have a beer. And we make no progress on really trying to address the bigger issue. Is there a problem with people in the racial profile? If it is, then let's try to move forward to do something about it. However, let's not always jump to that conclusion immediately. Let's let the facts come out before we come to the conclusion. We got to be balanced on both sides of this. Are y'all listening to me? We got to be balanced on both sides. If we always see race into every single thing, then we're always going to come to that conclusion. But if we are balanced and we recognize there is a tragic gap that exists, we do look at things differently, and we are shaped by our past experiences, our own biases and prejudices, and if we're not careful, we'll run to a conclusion before all the facts come out. And if we're going to make progress, we got to be prepared to say, well, maybe I was wrong. The police officer has to be prepared to say, you know, maybe I'm in this man's house. And so whatever the call was incorrect because I'm in his house. Gates has to be prepared to not start talking about people's mama because, you know, you can't do that either. Because now the whole situation breaks down. What we believe, what we think, what we have in our minds, it influences how we interpret things. It influences it greatly. And we, as individuals, we have to resist the temptation to come to a conclusion before we've heard all the facts about the matter. Now, what does it have to do with this text? I'm glad that you asked. Jesus is now in the last few days of his life, and so he is in the temple, and he's teaching in the temple. And he has already thrown the folks out of the temple from turning the house of God into a place of merchandise or a commercial enterprise. And now he's established his authority to teach authoritatively from the Bible and to reestablish the Bible as the standard for how people should interpret different situations in their respective lives. The religious leaders are questioning his authority, and they are challenging his authority, and now this becomes a public showdown. So it starts out really back over in chapter 19. Well, actually, in chapter 19, when he cleanses the temple, because cleansing the temple was a blatant act of authority. They questioned him about, well, who gave him this authority? And he says, well, the baptism of John was this of God of men. If you tell me, then I'll tell you where I got the authority from. They said, we can't tell because they feared the people. He said,